Open your Bibles, if you would, to John chapter 18 as we continue to explore this particular conversation. We call it Life's Big Five, these 5 questions about life in terms of our origin, our destiny, our identity, our meaning. What is morality? Is there such a thing? John chapter 18, verse 28. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early. They themselves did not enter into the praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Therefore Pilate went out to them, and he said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you." So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourself and judge him according to your law." And the Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death," to fulfill the word of Jesus which he had spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. Therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium, and he summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." Therefore Pilate said to him, "So, you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" This is the backbone for our conversation tonight. There's a lot of interesting things in this particular text that we've read, for sure. The fact that Pilate says, "What's the charge?" And the response was, "Well, he wouldn't be guilty if we hadn't brought him." That's not answering the question. Not only is this a travesty of justice, but I would say it's an assassination of truth. Because that's where Pilate ends with this. He's watching people that parade through the town every day talking about God and about truth and about morality and spirituality, and this is the kind of conversation he has with these people. What's the cause? Well, if he wasn't guilty, we wouldn't have brought him. Well, then, why don't you take care of it? Well, we can't kill him. Wow. So this is a capital issue. Where this is about putting someone to death. This is about crucifixion. Have you ever noticed how odd Jesus often answers questions? He has the capability of speaking plainly. There are times when he does, and it'll just blow your hair back. But often he doesn't. Just simple yes or no. Because when Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" in verse 33, Jesus said, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or do others tell you about me?" Why couldn't he just said yes? In fact, he answers the question with a question, but what Jesus does, he's fascinating to watch and to listen to, because Jesus always asks the real question. He probes to the real issue. And in this case, Pilate's wondering about all this weird stuff going on in this particular occasion with the Jews. But what Jesus said was, "Is this your own question, or are you asking this for someone else's benefit?" And so often I react to a question before I consider where it's coming from, because it makes a difference in how you answer it. Well, the way this ends up in the last part of verse 37 is Jesus says, "Everyone who is of the truth is those who hear my voice." So Pilate asks the famous question, what is truth? Pilate is a professional what? Politician. Do I need to fill in the blank there? Generally, that particular career field doesn't know truth if it ran over them, right? I was going to say something snarky like that, but I decided I probably shouldn't. when he had said this is the rest of the verse, he went out again to the Jews and he said, I find no guilt in him. See, that's truth. But it doesn't play well in the conversation, because if there's no guilt, then there's no crime. If there's no crime, there's no punishment. He'll end up punishing him, and it's not about truth. That's why Jesus said, is this your question, or is it something someone else is asking? And turns out this is not a personal pursuit of truth for Pilate. And that makes all the difference in the world. So, we're going to get to talk about some stuff I think is fun, evidences for God's existence and His will in the world and things like that. But I think we need to be reminded that the conversation that we have in our world today is much like the conversation between Jesus and Pilate. Often, it's not a pursuit of truth, rather there's some other agenda, potentially. So it makes a difference, the kind of conversations that we have. So we talked about last week just introducing where this conversation is going. So this is like introduction number 2 in this series. Isn't this just your opinion? Because we are conditioned, I think, in our society today that we're talked to about tolerance, we're talked to about relativism, and the idea is that truth is a fluid thing, it is a personal thing, that everybody has a right to their own truth. And that's important, because everybody has a right to their own belief. That's not the same thing as having a right to your own truth. And that's gotten fuzzy, I would suggest. So that opinion or tradition, though real things, have gotten stirred in to the idea of truth. Sometimes I hear it in our language as Christians. We might say things like, well, that's the truth, or we might say, that's just our traditions. Do we know the difference between the two? Because there are both. And so in a cultural conversation, we often start with, what is truth? Which is what Pilate asked. And we talked about last week that we demand absolute truth from these particular folks and others like it. We want truth from our loved ones. We want truth from doctors. We want truth from stockbrokers, courts, airlines. We want truth. So where we're in a disconnect is we expect truth in these areas, but then when we talk about morality or about relationships or about spirituality or about eternity, somehow we're at a place where the way we think is there's such things as truth when it comes to mathematics or engineering or that sort of thing, but that only applies there. And in the spiritual realm or relational realm, there's no such thing. Which leads us to what's called moral relativism, that it's moral truth for you is different than what it is to me, and everybody just do your own thing, and that's what we should be doing. So we need to explore this thought process about what is truth. There are sort of related, trying not to get ahead of myself a little bit, there are two basic principles that we use. They're called principles of logic that we use to recognize truth. One is, the term is called the law of non-contradiction, I think. An example would be, if you go up to a couple and you say, oh, are y'all expecting a baby? If the wife says no and the husband says yes, what does that mean? Because the law of non-contradiction is they can't both be speaking truth because it's in contradiction. Truth doesn't contradict truth. So if there's a contradiction, then one or maybe both statements aren't true. So it's either a yes or a no. Imagine if you asked that question, you said to someone, are you pregnant? Would the answer be kinda? That's a yes or a no. Now you could say, I don't know, but the truth of the question or the fact is either yes or a no. And so in a similar way, the second one, and I'll try to make sense out of this in a second, is called the law of the excluded middle. In other words, when you ask a yes or a no question, there's not a third option. So another example would be, does God exist? That's either a yes or a no. There's not a third answer, or a middle ground, or a fourth answer, or a kinda, because it'd be like going back to, are you expecting? Sorta. That's either a yes or a no. Truth, or the characteristics of truth, are that, number one, truth is discovered. It's not invented. The fact that we don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. For example, gravity existed long before the apple hit Isaac Newton on the head. He may not have discovered it or understood its principle, but it has always existed. So my knowledge or ignorance of a fact doesn't determine whether a fact exists. Make sense so far? You're probably going to start noticing some of this because we hear this, some of these in our society today. Truth is transcultural. In other words, if something's true, it's always true regardless of the culture. Now, that's the difference between opinion or traditions or perspectives or maybe even application. But 2 plus 2 is 4, whether you're in Midland or Africa or Argentina, or whether you say dos y dos es cuatro. You may say it differently, but the truth is the truth, regardless of culture. Now, already, this is something that may be starting to register with you because we use in our world, our culture, uses a language like, well, this is what's true for our culture, but we can't apply that to other cultures. You could never have an international space station if that were true. If their math was different than our math, we'd never get our rockets together. So the nature of truth is it doesn't matter where you are in history, where you are in culture, where you are in language, it's always the truth. It's always the same. Thirdly, truth is unchanging. Hello? Truth is unchanging, so when you assert the world is round rather than flat, it's going to stay round. Or 2 plus 2 will always be 4. You won't wake up one day and it's 6.5. The nature of truth is it's consistent. It always is. It's self-existent. Does that make sense so far? Y'all are like, and I don't know why we're talking about this. Eventually, I hope this makes sense. This is another important one. Beliefs cannot change a fact. Well, I don't think so. I mean, that was one of my standard arguments in the average test in school. Well, I don't believe that. That's not going to work. Because if teacher asks you, what's the name of this particular historical figure, on what date was this battle fought, what is the square root of, or what they want is the truth. And you can say, I've never agreed with pi. I just don't feel it. I just don't think so. That doesn't matter, okay? So I can believe something is true or not true. That has no bearing on whether it is true. Does that make sense to you? Now, this is huge because this particular one is what drives what's become the perception of truth, because we have confused belief with fact. I believe it, therefore that makes it true. I don't want to believe it, therefore it's not true. That's not truth. Ma'am?
Can I offer an example of that?
As long as you agree with me, yes.
I used to teach a premarital class for couples.
Okay.
And it was not necessarily church related. We had people from all over the community. And so I would inevitably have at least 2 or 3 couples who were living together before they were married. And one of the things I would share with the class is that there's research that demonstrates that has followed couples long term and demonstrates that couples who get married, who live together before actually getting engaged together, have an 80% higher likelihood of divorce than couples who don't do that. And so I would always share that. Every single class I ever taught, somebody would raise their hand, and it was usually always one of the couples that was living together, and say, well, I just don't believe that. And I always wanted to say, well, You don't have to, but it's still true.
Right. Which, to pull full circle, that's what Pilate is doing, is that we allow our beliefs or our preferences or our wants to drive our willingness to recognize truth. If it is what is the expression? I hate it when my cherished belief gets trampled by a gang of unruly facts. Because that's the kind of experience where all of a sudden, oh no, I may have to change my belief. So we are perfectly comfortable rejecting truth from the simple fact of, I don't want it. And so in that case, you would hope somebody would say, well, now my research and the data that I've gathered says this. Well, that would at least be an interesting pursuit of truth. But it's like you can show up with 6 inches of research and data and go, well, this is what we have, which we're going to get to how you discover truth. And somebody can go, nah, based on, oh, okay, well, that'll fly. That'll work. So beliefs cannot change a fact because they're not the same thing. This is also helpful. Truth is not affected by attitude. Now, its reception can be affected by attitude, but if a truth is shared arrogantly or humbly, it doesn't change whether or not what the content was or what was said was true. We've gotten hypersensitive to this one. If you're not being nice, then you must not be speaking truth. If you're being really nice, then what you're saying must be true. So we use the attitude of the delivery as a determining factor of whether something's true. Some of the hardest truths you may hear are delivered in a way you don't want to hear it. Right? But it is essential that we recognize, separate truth from delivery or message from messenger. We're fairly feelings focused, and so this becomes a huge thing. Now, to be fair, it does affect reception. It's hard to hear somebody speaking truth when they're being a jerk. That's true. But it doesn't change the content of what is being said. We're good so far. All right? Therefore, all truths are absolute truths. What's interesting, one fellow said, there are no absolute truths. Are you absolutely sure about that? Because that's what you just did. You just made an absolute truth statement that there are no absolute truths. Truth is, by its very nature, absolute. Because if it's transcultural, if it's timeless, if it doesn't matter how it's shared, if it's, I already said, unchanging, then it is, by definition, absolute truth. 2 + 2 is 4, regardless of any of these other circumstances. Therefore, it's absolute truth. If it's only true part of the time, then it's not truth. That's the nature of truth. Reason why this matters, most of us get that in a scientific or mathematical or engineering context, financial context. We're like, duh, no kidding. So we do a weird disconnect when we move away from that category to relational, emotional, spiritual, eternal categories. We like throw all this out the window. And that's why we're taking the time to talk about the very nature of truth. So truth is absolute. So secondly, how can truth be known? Well, as an example, if I were just to pick up a random book, this is a psalm book, of course, but if I were to just get any book, the way we discover truth is a process that's called induction and deduction. Induction is observation of evidence. So I have seen people write down information. And I know by observation that books are created by authors. And if I have observed that enough, that's the induction, or that's the evidence, or that's a repeatable observation, that I notice that people or authors create books. Now, to be fair, I have not seen every book that has ever been produced. So I can't claim to have perfect knowledge, But we recognize if I've seen enough books, I can then draw a conclusion so that I'm able to walk up to this and say, this is a book. Number two, books are created by authors. So the deduction then is, therefore, this book was created by a author. So it's a combination of something I have observed, and then I've drawn a deduction or I've drawn a conclusion based on what I've observed. This book has been written by an author. Now we're going to start making the connection right here. Did I see the author write this book? No. What I did was walked up and found a book. But you and I will regularly and easily recognize this truth discovery process. We will say, there's no book that comes into existence without an author, even though I haven't seen every book that's ever been written. But it's repeatable enough for me to draw the conclusion, therefore, every book requires an author. So when someone begins to ask the next question, then how can truths about God be known? Which is where we're headed now in this conversation. We're going to use the same process. We're going to look for truth. We're going to look at an induction process. We're going to observe evidence. We're going to look at it. And then we're going to draw conclusions based on it. Because, let's go over to Romans chapter 1. This is the process that the Bible even talks about. I'm not sure what you think about this introduction. Personally, I like to run right into the evidences and different things, and I think that's fun and exciting. But the reason why we're taking time to do a little bit of this is because here's a common experience. I ran into a fellow a little while back who said, do you really believe the Bible's the Word of God? I said, I really do. And really? And I said, yeah, I really do. He said, well, I don't think so. I just don't think so. I said, okay, well, why is that? And he said, well, I just don't think that the things in the Bible make sense. I said, well, have you read the Bible? Well, no. Okay, well, so you're arguing out of ignorance. That's not a pejorative term. It just means you're arguing about something you've not looked into. Well, yeah, maybe. He said, okay, well, let me ask you this question. He said, then, I just lost the word. So I don't want to give away where I'm headed. What's the cup that Jesus drinks out of? What's it called? Grail. He said, what about the Holy Grail? And I said, and I'm thinking, well, when Jesus says this is my blood, drink it, he says, what about the Holy Grail? And I said, what about it? He said, do you really think that it has healing powers and you're trying to say that people can drink out of it and then they're going to get better? I said, are you talking Indiana Jones? He said, no, Monty Python.
That's a good place to get him.
That's a real conversation. He said, or how about this? How about the Da Vinci Code? Huh? And I said, you're talking about the book? He goes, there's a book? I saw the movie. I said, well, there's a book, and it's a work of fiction, which means it's not real, it's not history, and even if it was, all the book does, and Tom Hanks did, was finally figure out what Da Vinci thought, who lived, 1,000 years after it all happened. So, okay, even if that is what Da Vinci thought, that doesn't mean what was. Oh, I didn't know that. I was like, yeah, I know. Because we have I don't want to summarize this. This may not be fair or accurate, but a reactionary culture that uses as its default truth detector how it feels about something. So when we talk about truths, how can truths about God be known? Here's what Paul wrote some nearly 2,000 years ago in verse 18 of Romans 1. He says it this way, For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature, having been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. What Paul references us to is observable evidence. So how can truths about God be known? He just said it. That God has revealed it within us and he's revealed it around us. An example would be, how do you discover the truth about gravity? It is also unseen. Well, what we can do is observe its effects. We can observe the evidence. We can find a pattern or something that is repeatable, test it, and discover here's a truth about gravitational forces, even though we can't see it. I think my favorite example of that, blows my mind, is when the Apollo 13 mission had its explosion right out of transit from Earth's orbit to the moon. They realized that they didn't have the means, the fuel and whatnot, to get back with a retro burn. So you're talking about when a bunch of guys with pocket protectors and pins and stuff, they whipped out their slide rules. And using slide rules, they were calculating the mass of the spacecraft, its velocity and vector, and figured an approach angle to come by the moon just at the right angle to neither be pulled into it nor go off into space forever, but get pulled around it to get slingshot back to the Earth when both the Earth and the moon are moving. So they had to lead the Earth so that when they finally got to a spot, the Earth was there too. So you're talking about, that's one of my favorite examples. One fellow said, well, no wonder Apollo 13 had trouble. Forrest Gump was driving. But you're talking about, that just blows my mind, the precision of the science and the mathematical calculations, and they were doing it with slide rules and graph paper, and you can't do that unless the truth about gravity can be discerned. And it's unchanging, it's transcultural, it doesn't matter what you believe, it's consistent because it's an absolute truth. I think one of the most interesting ideas, an example would be electromagnetic waveforms in the room tonight. God designed us with eyeballs that can recognize a very narrow spectrum of electromagnetic energy, light, and depending on the frequency, we see colors. We can even tell with instruments when the light's coming to us or going away from us. But what blows my mind is there's a lot more than that in this room. If we somehow could get special glasses to see every electromagnetic waveform in this room, there's, let's see, what would there be? There'd be TV signal in here. There's radio signal in here. I know there's at least one cell phone in here tonight. There are Wi-Fi. What else we got in here? Microphones. We could get up in the high end and talk about gamma rays, and there's X-rays, there's heat radiation and other forms of natural. Those are all examples of electromagnetic waveforms which are here. But see, when you talk about somebody says, how can you really know there's a God? How can you really pursue this? This is what I hope tonight. One, if you're not sure, I hope you're encouraged in your faith. And for a lot of us who believe in God, I hope we're given a tool. I hope there's one thing you come out here, just one sentence out of all this stuff. There's just one sentence you come out with that helps you talk to someone. One example would be, how do you know there is cellular data signal in the room? Well, I'd whip out my iPhone, and I've got a little signal on the top, is it left side or right? Top left side, I think, the little cool arches. And I know that when I have those little arches, those lines, that means I have a signal, and it's demonstrated because I can text, email, Facebook, whatever. And what I have noticed is when the bars go away, so does my ability to read emails or get texts or phone call or whatever, right? So I can't see a cellular data signal. But what I can do through induction, what I have noticed, the evidence is whenever I have bars, I have internet. Internet is a result of a data signal that I can't see. So really what we're going to be talking about is walking through this wide world, recognizing the bars for God's existence. Because we will see an effect, and we'll be able to draw conclusions, truthful conclusions about God. In the exact same way that we do everything else in life. Because if it's truth, then it would be discovered or be consistent the same way. Are there such things as relational truth? Shake your head this way quickly. Yes. I could observe that if I walk in the house and I say something mean to my wife, there's going to be trouble. And after a while, after several of those, I might draw some conclusions that are relational truths. Don't say this kind of stuff. Right? We do that. We do it all the time. All the time. So the way that we'll talk about the truths of God is in the same way that we would talk about gravity or magnetic fields or electromagnetic waveform or anything else you want to talk about. There's a lot of invisible stuff in our world. Even the simple book example, I have not seen every book be written by an author, which means the vast majority of books that I have or I've seen or I've read have an invisible author. I've never seen them. I've only been to one book signing party ever. That was cool. But yet I can know that there are authors for each of those books. So what? When you talk about truth, if there's not an application, if there's not a so what, then the word for that is it's trivial. Who won the, okay, that's a truth, there's a fact. In 1953, who won the, and I'm like, I don't care. Because it has no bearing in my life at all. That's why it's called trivial knowledge. It's truth, it's facts, but I could care less. It has no bearing on me. And so it's a fair question to say, okay, who cares about truth? Truth matters physically when we talk about morality, because that's where we're going to finally park. Is there such a thing as spiritual truth? What does that matter? Who cares? Whatever, do your own thing. Well, spiritual truth matters physically because what about things like murder or theft or assault? Is that right? Is that wrong? How do you determine that? What about emotionally? If there's no such thing as discernible absolute truth, then emotionally we're left insecure, with doubt, fear. Do you like things to be trustworthy in your life? Truth matters relationally, trust. Truth matters spiritually. If nothing else, here's a yes or no question. Does heaven and hell exist? By the first two principles we started with, your answer has to be either yes or no. Does it make a difference which one it is? Yeah. That's like, it's the biggest difference I can think of. Because if the answer is no, okay. If the answer is yes, then there are some significant consequences, or when we go back to life's big five, what is our destiny? That has a huge impact on the way I answer that question. Somebody asked one time, what is the greatest problem in America, ignorance or apathy? And the fellow said, well, I don't know, and I don't care. I read something just a few weeks ago. It's been bugging me because it's a part of my vocabulary too. And the statement was something like this. It was like, America needs men. Let's see. America needs less men with man caves and more men with libraries, studies, and workshops. In one sense, you're just changing words because different guys do different things, but it was an interesting point. Man cave often has to do with just the pursuit of pleasure. And by itself, that's not wrong, but as far as growing and being more mature and being stimulated to be more, there used to be a study or a library or a workroom or a shop where things were created or things were learned. I thought it was an interesting, sometimes we just quibble about words. I get that, but it kind of was, for me, it was like, I should probably think about that a little bit. Because as a society, I don't know that we are currently moving in the direction of developing great thinkers. I mean, just take your own, just get your mirror out and look at yourself for a little bit, and let's ask ourselves, do we personally spend any time pursuing truth? There's all kinds of truths. Or do we just sort of kind of blow through life from one weekend to the next? Ignorance is a problem. Not knowing is a problem. It's a problem medically, it's a problem scholastically, it's a problem relationally, and it's a problem spiritually. But where there's apathy, the I don't care, we're kind of in the whatever, then there's no progress, no change, no growth. Big question today, is the heart, we mentioned it a little earlier, is the heart a reliable truth indicator? And I'm going to say, friends, this is huge, I think. I think our society uses feelings or emotion as the primary truth detector. And the problem with that is, have you ever been wrong? Would you like to be on the spaceship when NASA signals via radio waves, here is your angle and your burn duration to make sure you insert yourself in the proper orbit, and if you said, are you sure about this? If they said, we think so. Or if they said, feels good to us. So again, we know better than that. If you got an airplane and you buckled in and they pushed you back from the gate and the pilot was spooling up the engines and he says, welcome to American Flight 1993. We're en route to New York today, and it feels like we'll have a good chance of making it. You know, we just wouldn't do that. And so this inconsistency is why we had this conversation about, well, wait a minute. Truth is truth, whether it's a biomechanical, engineering, chemistry application, or it's a spiritual application. Truth is truth. The simple question to check that, is there a heaven or a hell? There's an example where, wow, you know what? Truth matters spiritually. And then lastly, truth is perceived, but it's not necessarily received. Going back to what I said about attitude, attitude doesn't determine the truth of the content, but it can affect reception. Has anybody heard the phrase constructive criticism? I despise that phrase.
It's not constructive.
I don't like it when somebody says, now, Mike, you know I love you, but... I'm like, stop right there. Just right there, that's good, because I know what's coming next is probably going to hurt. However, the phrase comes from a realistic standpoint. If we're going to improve at whatever it is we're talking about, then we have to be shown things that we can grow in. And that's really what the word constructive criticism is supposed to be, is a criticism that builds you up. Constructive, it builds you up. Now, we typically associate the word criticism as a negative term. I remember the first time in a class, I heard two words I had trouble getting over. One, the professor said, we're going to learn apologetics. And I thought, why are we apologizing? And that comes from the Greek word to give an answer. When Peter says, be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you, that's the Greek word he's using. So apology, as in I'm sorry, has kind of come a long way from where it started. The other word is, you boys are going to have to read this critical commentary. And I thought, great, that's all I need, somebody ragging on stuff. And the other word was, because it's critical thinking. Well, can't we be positive? Those are just words that means to really think about something, to examine something. It's a word that you would use in a laboratory. So critical thinking or a critical commentary, it doesn't mean negative, it means paying attention to the details. And so in that context, that's what constructive criticism is supposed to be. But after you've heard it as a club a time or two, you associate it with a different experience. So truth is perceived. Remember, gravity already existed, but Isaac Newton had to perceive it because gravity is unseen. You don't run into it. So he had to perceive it by seeing its effects and seeing things around him, and kept dropping an apple going, well, that's weird. It always ends up on the floor. My dad, after his back surgery, has this running gripe. He'll drop something and he gets frustrated and says, every time you drop something, it ends up on the floor. Yeah. Kind of glad it does, Dad, or it'd be crazy around here if it didn't. Of course, he's really meaning something else, I'm sure. So often, truth is perceived, but unfortunately, that doesn't mean that it's received. And Lynn Ann, yours example is, if I don't want to hear it, or if my cherished belief is attacked by a gang of unruly facts, I may not want the result. So like Pilate, we have the capacity to look right at truth and say no. Because it has to be ultimately received. You can deny gravity. You don't have to believe in it. It's still true, though, isn't it? But you don't have to accept it. You have the capacity to walk out saying, I think it's all made up. Okay. So next week, we're going to get to finally start moving into, so what can we perceive about the unseen?